Afternoon and welcome to all of you. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Brian McGuire. I'll be leading the session today. This is a public roundtable called Together for the Future of Europe, an EU post-COVID recovery based on cohesion principles and values. And so today the hashtag is hashtag EU Future Together. Please use that. Our social media team will retweet, and you can add comments to whatever they've published today as well. The public in general will not have an open floor with audio today, but you can send your questions and your comments using the Q&A button at the below the screen. And so please do that. You don't have to wait till the end. We'll be monitoring that all the way through, and the team will push some of the questions and comments to me as well, and we'll put those to our panelists later on as well. Please put those in English or in French, and we'll be able to use those. We can also repost some of those on social media if you'd like us to. Please tell us who you are, where you're from. You don't have to, but it makes it more interesting so we can see who the audience is today. So let me hand over to President of the European Parliament Former Members Association, Hans-Gert Püttering. Great to see you, sir.
Good to see you, Brian. Thank you so much.
Floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. On behalf of the European Parliament Former Members Association, I would like to welcome our colleagues, former parliamentarians, and the public, which includes many university students and professors, and of course our guests. Our association has the ambition to reach out to and involve citizens, in particular the youngest generations, promoting a plural debate with the support of academic institutions and media, making use of the valuable expertise of our European former parliamentarians. And we are very happy, Brian, that you are moderating again, and this is part of the success already. Our association started accompanying the work of the Conference on the Future of Europe through a reflection group composed of 9 eminent former MEPs. They all were involved in one way or the other with the intergovernmental conferences or the convent under the leadership of former President of France, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing. And this group of 9 eminent former MEPs has really great experience, and we are waiting for their proposals concerning the Conference on the Future of Europe. We feel that it is our duty, even as former members of the European Parliament, and we are aware we are not active politicians anymore, but that we have a responsibility to give our contribution to the debate. And I want to invite all members of the Former Members Association to make their contribution and send their ideas to our Secretariat of the Former Members Association under the strong leadership and good leadership of Elisabetta Fonck, who is sitting beside me, so she is listening what I'm saying, but I would even have said that if she would not be here. We discussed today on a very challenging and topical theme, EU post-COVID recovery based on cohesion principles and values. We need to raise a constructive debate on fundamental and controversial issues for the future development and welfare of the European Union and raise awareness among the European public. This is the only way to build a free and informed consensus about the decisions taken on a European level on crucial issues for European citizens. We all need to be architects and in control of the development of our future economies. This is a crucial moment to rethink our future with a huge amount of money that member states are expected to spend, and the European Union as well, to spend in a rather short period of time for the benefit of the communities and on the entire European Union. I am now eager to listen to our experts and look forward to an interesting and informative debate with them and our public. And I'm very happy that Brian McGuire will take the floor again so I can be relaxed and listen to what our experts are saying, and you will introduce our experts. And I thank everybody for his or her presence. Thank you so much.
That's good. Thank you so much. You stay there. We're not going to let you away that easily today. Thank you. Our next guest speakers, we have 3 speakers for the first panel, which is about an uneven European economic recovery. So I'll introduce our keynote speaker first, which is Michael Landebezo. He's the Director of Growth and Innovation at the Joint Research Centre for the European Commission. Good to see you, Michael. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Mr. President and honorable members, friends, amiga Teresa. I'm delighted to be here, to be sharing with you a number of reflections, no, to work on this so important, so critically important topic. But before that, we are going to talk about the pandemic, and I want to wish you that you are all well and safe, and that we will be able to meet together in person soon. Now, my intention is to really briefly go through some key aspects of the nature, the key features of the pandemic, so it's diagnostic. Then I would like to look into the socioeconomic impact of this crisis, and finally, what to do about it. What to do about it while preserving these values you were referring to: solidarity, fairness. For me, those are the cohesion values we will be discussing about. So let me start by these key features of the diagnostic. Many people, when this pandemic hit, they said, well, this time is different. And unlike many other crises, the financial crisis, the last one, for example, this is truly different. This time is truly different. This is a crisis of demand. So you have a loss of consumption, travel stopped, tourism collapsed 80% in Spain, for example. And it is a crisis of supply, the disruption of value chains, of suppliers, the interruption of international trade, globalization put into question to some extent. And this crisis of supply and demand affected everybody, everywhere, and at the same time. And let me be a bit philosophical about this to start with. Then we'll go into the numbers. But the first thing to say is that, this crisis was sudden. It changed the political agenda one day to the next. We were not discussing about the same things and identifying the same challenges and opportunities 1 week after this pandemic hit. This crisis was unexpected, and it was unexpected because we didn't listen. We didn't listen to pressure, for example, to Professor Golden, who I had the pleasure to be exchanging on this precisely from Oxford, that said, it's coming, you're not prepared, or even the Bill Gates Foundation and others. And then this crisis was highly, highly disruptive. This crisis is highly disruptive. It was devastating for international trade. It was 2-3 times maybe the financial crisis, and the latest figures we have to substantiate this claim just appeared from Eurostat is we expect a loss of 6.6% of the GDP last year in the euro area and 3 million jobs lost. And some people are trying to think ahead to prevent this crisis mutating into another financial crisis. Okay. So what are the political and policy consequences of all this? Well, I think one day, the sudden crisis, we woke up to the fact that we are vulnerable. North and south, east and west, rich and poor, old and young, we are all vulnerable. And as a consequence also, we also realized that we are interdependent. We are interdependent. My solution is no solution if yours doesn't work. And this is something to keep in mind also in connection with these cohesion values you are referring to at an international level. So what are the policy consequences? I can identify at least 3 paradigm shifts. The first one is, we went from austerity to embracing Keynesianism, different forms, but new forms, but Keynesianism. You listen to the European Council on Competitiveness Council last week, and you see the ministers discussing about the state aid and the revision of the state aid framework and things like that. You also have to think in terms of a paradigm shift in economic terms from this notion of efficiency in the global economy, so minimize cost, maximize shareholders' value in the short term, to a new word, which is so present in the headlines, which is resilience. Resilience, the capacity to thrive in the face of difficulties. And I must say that we made a contribution to that just recently. Vice President Šefčovič was talking about the first foresight report of the European Commission, and the bulk of that is a reflection on resilience. And as we speak, we are negotiating with the member states what we call the resilience dashboards. So how do we become bamboo? The capacity to, to resist and bounce back forward, this time in line with our president's vision in terms of the twin transition, digital and the Green Deal. So, and some economists, some colleagues say that this crisis, what it is doing is compressing the amount of transformation that was supposed to be taking place over a longer period of time in a very short period of time, and offering us the opportunity, and we will be talking about opportunity in terms of this crisis, in terms of bouncing forward. But for that, we need good policy making. Headlines from just in time to just in case. Words like reshoring, words like strategic autonomy appear on the table. So, and this is the third dilemma, from intergovernmental, and we are doing fine, to multilateral cooperation. We are interdependent. We have to put some order, provide some frameworks, because, for example, our research is telling us that synchronized de-escalation from the crisis, so a European approach, a coordinated approach, will mean from 1 to 2% of GDP, and a lot more for some of the countries. So my policies will be much more efficient if they are synchronized with yours. And we have the governance system to do that. Let's do it. We are confronted with dilemmas also. In this crisis, we were confronted, and we still are, with a number of dilemmas. Dilemmas that really hinge on this balance between recovery and transformation, quick recovery. The dilemma that everybody talked about between lives and livelihoods. And there is no contradiction, there's no trade-off, it's one and the other. Many people just said, including our former vice president, I think was saying the best policy now, economic policy, is vaccination, vaccination, vaccination. Then we also need to think about how to make sure that this fiscal muscle that has been expressed timely can reach the real economy. The small and medium-sized enterprises, those that have a chance of survival, they have to get the money, the support in a timely basis. The second dilemma is this search for a strategic autonomy in this new global order, that it is in the making to a long extent. Look at the events in the US and their new policies, and this being a factor of facilitating our own recovery. We synchronize, we complement, we adapt mutually. And this is precisely one of the three factors I will be referring later that will determine if we recover this year and next year between 3 and 5% of the GDP of the Union. The lower threshold if we do not take into account the these considerations, and the higher one if we do. And finally, the last dilemma I'm going to refer to is this how to fight the effects of the pandemic, this resilience, this bamboo thing, together with making sure that we are fighting, we are facing the challenge of climate change, and the challenge that it is not so prevalent in the literature, in the discussions of automatization, of artificial intelligence. We have the Observatory on Artificial Intelligence, and we need to be focused on this too. In particular, considering that nearly 1/4 of the economic activities that we have today can be automatized in the near future. And finally, as a summary of all this, in particular in this political setting, if I may say so, political with a big P, is how do we maintain and enhance the economic and social market model that we enjoy here in Europe? How to maintain the middle classes? How do we have a reasonable distribution of economic activity throughout the territory? A recent McKinsey report is telling us in next 10 years, half of the new jobs will happen in just 48 global cities, and that 40% of our regions will be decreasing in employment. We need to face this situation. Cohesion values, the territorial dimension has to be built. Now, very quickly, if I may, the impact of the crisis. One word, asymmetry. Asymmetry, and also, to a very large extent, a regressive impact. Those that are weaker have suffered most and risk suffering most unless we have compensatory policies. Why do I say asymmetry? Our research in the Joint Research Center is clearly establishing that there are a number of sectors now substantiated with figures. Those sectors that were suffering most from obligatory lockdowns, those sectors that were more dependent on face-to-face interactions were most hardly hit. And these sectors are more or less represented in different parts of our geography. It is in general industry versus services, but in order to be more fine-grained, we can talk about retail and wholesale trade, 600,000 jobs down in Europe, but in one country, like the one I'm in today, it was 157,000 jobs down. In Germany, it was half of that figure. Entertainment and cultural and recreational activities, more than 500,000 down. Hospitality and restoration, it's also one of the hardest hit. And the strong connection with tourism. Look at the small open economies in the southern periphery and their tourism dependence to illustrate that. So, of course, construction and transport also very hard hit. And remember, workers in wholesale, workers in hospitality, or workers in construction, on average, they have approximately 1 month of savings as a buffer if they have to survive through a very long crisis, as it was the case today. By countries, regions, and cities, we have done a map clearly identifying the economic effects of the pandemic. You see which ones are more or less affected. Clearly, there is a geography to this crisis. By gender, vulnerable sectors employ much more women than men, 56 versus 46%. And we have produced also some reports on this. The increased need for care inside the house, outside, family, teleworking and its impact, and even in terms of the statistics on domestic abuse, you can see that there is a gender asymmetry in the impact. By type of worker, younger workers are much more represented, as well as temporary workers in the vulnerable sectors, significantly so. And then also we did a report on the capacity to telework. You know, in the percentage of working, of workers working from home in Europe went suddenly from 5% to 12%. And the capacity of jobs being teleworkable is very different across countries. You have on one extreme, for example, Romania with 27%, on the other one, maybe the Netherlands with nearly 50%, 44% actually. The skill and age, the business culture are also determinant in terms of the teleworking capacity. And our analysis says that nearly 40% of all the jobs in the Union can be teleworkable. And we are moving clearly in that direction. But let me continue with the asymmetry very quickly. It is clear that there is an increase in poverty. The Gini coefficient has shot up by 1%. Would have been 3.3% in the absence of compensatory policies. And this is something I want to also underline. The automatic stabilizers, so playing with taxes and social benefits, has compensated for half of the impact, negative impact of this crisis. So luckily we had it. But of course, the fiscal muscle, the asymmetry in the fiscal muscle to compensate for the effects of the crisis varies. Generally speaking, you could have like, these automatic stabilizers having a 60% or more effect in for example, in Holland, in the Netherlands, and in the northern, generally speaking, northern countries in the Union, while in the south, in some countries in the East, this is only 36%. And finally, there is also something very significant that we will see in the medium long term, which is the loss in learning. We have done a report also in what pandemic did in terms of learning lost by students and what it means in terms of income lost in the future. And it is clear that we find that 60%, the effect is 60% more larger, this negative effect in students from less educated homes, and there are good reasons for that. Finally, because we need this debate, what do we do about it, and how do we answer your question you started with? Well, I think we have to find opportunity in this crisis. Huh? And as I said, there is maybe a long postponed transformation that it is happening. And if we redirect this transformation in the right direction, this is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to move fast and to do things that would have taken longer. But this is dependent on a number of issues. The necessary condition was solidarity and reflexes, political reflexes in Europe. And this has happened. We have the historically biggest ever budget, 1.8 trillion, to deal with this. Plus the right attitude. Plus, I think, a strengthening of the European vision model, because we have introduced solidarity. Own resource decision has been signed, and we are going to the markets for the first time to finance this effort in a solidarity effort. But we have to respond to history, and in particular, the countries hardest hit, that they can use wisely this opportunity, this money, this solidarity effort from the rest of the countries. And there, once again, cohesion values. I think our commissioner responsible for cohesion is coming after later. They have so much experience in structural funds, with all the difficulties and criticisms you may want to put on the table, but more than 30 years of experience in channeling resources in terms of cohesion countries is really precious, and we need to build on that. And in that sense, I think that one fundamental issue, and with this I will close, is to be aware that there is no way out of this crisis unless we invest massively on innovation. Innovation is not just research, basic research, fundamental, health sector, for example, we have just seen, but also in terms of the Green Deal. The International Energy Agency is telling us 2/3 of the technology we need to reach the Green Deal objectives are not here with that yet. They are being tested, they need to be developed, we need to promote innovation. I mean, the same holds true for the digital vision that we try to approach. So we need to promote innovation. We need to avoid an innovation divide. And one way of doing it, and drawing on the experience of the structural funds cohesion policies and values, is precisely on this methodology on innovation strategies for a smart specialization that we, together with the colleagues in Regio, are developing into smart specialization strategies for sustainability this time around. And this is nothing but public-private partnerships, where the private sector catalyzes private investment and tries to develop innovation in a broad sense, in an open innovation sense, but also in a broad sense, not just research, but also technology transfer, technology adoption by SMEs. So what is going to happen? Well, it depends on vaccination. The global environment, the global outlook, looking good now, with the US taking the stance they are taking. And finally, critically important, after our latest report and now casting for the future is what will people, expectations, animal spirits, if you want, do with the savings? Compulsory savings during the pandemic and voluntary savings. That will determine if we bounce back this bamboo thing into 5% or more this year, next year, this great opportunity to modernize. So your question, yes, the principles of solidarity and fairness are key to ensuring a sustainable recovery with a triple bottom line: social, environmental, and economic. Back to you, Brian. Sorry for being long.
I'll quote someone exactly, Hans-Gert. This is an excellent introduction, and we had a comment sent to me as well to say so. So you've set the ground firmly, and it's for us to walk all over it and muddy those waters a little bit now too. Thank you, Mikkel. And let's introduce now Konrad Mikulovic. He's visiting fellow at the Wilfred Martin Center for European Studies. Konrad, great to have you with us. And the floor is yours. You have short opening remarks as well. So let's hear that.
Mr. President, Brian, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to pledge the case of European cities, linking to what Michael mentioned in his keynote speech. The social and economic role of cities, regardless of the effects of COVID-19 pandemics, is set to remain crucial for global development. And therefore, it should be reflected in both cohesion policies and the EU Next Generation recovery measures. If we look at the last decades, cities have been building their roles as economic hubs, and they consume, as for now, 60 to about 80% of energy resources globally, and they account for at least 70% of world's GDP, which is quite important. Just to give you two examples, Paris, the great capital of France, it is home to the metropolis of Paris is home only to 16% of the French population, but it generates way over 20% of the country's GDP. Take the example of a smaller city, smaller capital, Warsaw, the capital of Poland. It comprises just 4.7% of Poland's population, but it accounts for 13% of the country's GDP. And I am pretty sure that cities in the future, they will still continue to generate the most of future growth. For the cities are not only the business centers, but also the hubs of political and cultural innovation. Unfortunately, and here is my pledging the case of cities, unfortunately, not every government, national government, seem ready to acknowledge the particular role of cities and the role they play in economics and in social life. Cities, as we look at them now, they strive for more tangible powers and new development support tools, which would allow them to address better the challenges they all face. And the challenges are common for each and every European city. I would like to draw your attention to one fact. In one of the recent surveys, only 21% of Europeans have declared full trust in national governments. 45% declared such trust in regional and city governments. This is a huge difference, a positive difference for cities and their local governments. There are some scholars, like, for example, the Oxford-based Jan Zielonka, Professor Jan Zielonka, who argue that cities, they are not only the engines of European economy, but they should also play a significant role in countering the weaknesses of European construction. And there are some weaknesses of European construction we all know about. Again, not every national government seems to be willing to properly reflect the importance of cities in national strategic plans. I can for sure take the example of one particular government, the Polish one, and its proposed distribution of EU Next Generation funds. As of now, Polish cities, they raise valid questions about the transparency of the process of distributing the EU Next Gen funds, but also on how the government is going to distribute and use the recovery measure money, grants and loans, how they will be monitored. I do believe that we all need a new European city agenda. I'm pretty aware of the current European policy regarding these cities, but I do believe it's too modest. I do believe urban-related issues should be at the very center of European Union political activity. And it should identify the challenges that cities face, and it should come up with some ways to address them. Among the most pressing, of course, the climate change related themes, such as public transportation, urban planning, but also the ongoing housing crisis. I mean, this is one of the crises which is often overlooked, and it should not be. The housing crisis, it strikes at the very heart of the social cohesion. It strikes at the very heart of the issue of equality. And if we want to have a sane European public sphere, if we want to have a sane European commonwealth of societies and nations, we have to vehemently fight the inequalities, because inequalities provide us with many, many problems. One of them is political populism. So if we address correctly one of the issues of inequalities, which is the housing policy, which is concentrated in cities, especially in big cities, then we are on the right track. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Konrad. Excellent. We're going to return to some of those issues in just a moment as well. Our next speaker today is Saeed El-Khadraoui, and he is the former member of the European Parliament and special advisor to the Foundation of European Progressive Studies on the European Green Deal. Good to have you with us, Saeed.
Hi, Brian, President. Thank you very much for the opportunity to contribute to this timely discussion. Then thanks also to Michael for his introduction. I certainly come back to some of the points he made. But let me first go back to the early days of the pandemic. We all remember these terrible images from Italy that was first hit by the virus, the crowded hospitals, dying people, the first lockdowns. Was this Italy's fault? No. In a way, it was bad luck. And indeed, Italy, like almost all the other member states, was ill-prepared. The events were soon followed by a kind of a game of panic football, with borders closing, finger pointing, etc. But luckily, these developments also highlighted how much our economies are interlinked and depend on each other. Remember the German factories that stood idle because their Italian suppliers weren't able to deliver components. So somehow the realizations that we're all in this together contributed to a shift in the mindset. And that opened the door for the development of a number of European solidarity mechanisms, including the joint purchase of vaccines, the launch of SURE, that help countries to develop and finance automatic stabilizers, and of course the 750 billion euro next generation EU that is being rolled out. It was mentioned before. But we also saw, of course, big differences between member states' capabilities to respond. The loosening of the EU state aid guidelines is a case in point. Germany, if you look at the figures, for instance, was able to massively support some companies in difficulty, whilst other member states had not necessarily the financial means to do this at the same scale. Similarly, it is becoming clear that vulnerable people everywhere in Europe have been affected most, both by the virus, because they do the type of jobs that increases the risk of being contaminated, and also by the economic consequences of the pandemic, because they work, and Michael emphasized this already, they work in heavily impacted sectors, such as tourism or the hospitality sector more broadly. So coming back to the recovery, there is a collective responsibility here in the interest of everybody to address the danger of widening inequalities. And in addition, we need to have a more proactive stance. Use the momentum that is here to prepare for the next crisis waiting to happen, the climate crisis that has been mentioned, that coincides with other challenging developments, including the digitization of our economy and a multipolar world where Europe needs to find its place between the US, China, and so on. But unlike with the COVID-19 crisis, we cannot develop targeted vaccines or silver bullets against global warming. It's a much more complex effort, let's say. A more fundamental and long-lasting transformation of our socio-economic model is needed. It is about rethinking the key systems that define the way we live and work, the energy, mobility, food systems, and so on. And so the recovery plans are a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to change the backbone of our economies and to skip a few steps towards the sustainable infrastructure needed to create a climate neutral and circular economy everywhere in Europe. Let us not forget that investment decisions today will have an impact for the next 30, 40 years. So better be smart. And we need to do it not only to halt global warming and avoid its catastrophic consequences. It is in the shorter term also a matter of competitiveness. And it's also about securing the foundations of our welfare states. Will the EU set the terms of a future decarbonized world? Or will it be China? Or will it be the US? And that is why I think that the 37% earmarking for climate action in the national recovery plans is crucial. It's important. It's great. But quantitative targets do not say anything about the quality of these projects or the real impacts they will have in the longer term. So this needs to be linked with robust monitoring, indeed, but also with smart innovation, with industrial policies, etc., to ensure good outcomes. The last point I want to make is that it has been emphasized that you know, some of these exceptional measures are temporary in nature, the Next Generation EU, etc. But I sincerely hope that they are also the germ of something more structural and long-term, because in view of the huge challenges we face collectively, the EU needs to be better prepared and also have the means for more collective and strategic actions. So let's already start thinking today about how actually these new instruments and the recovery facility, etc., can be transformed into maybe a transition facility that could be integrated into the next EU MFF, because this transformation of the economy is something that will last decades. We will need, you know, 10, 20, 30 years really to get there. So thank you very much. Happy to respond to your questions and continue the conversation.
Thank you. Michael, let's go back to you first of all. I like the bamboo approach for this, so bouncing forward with this. Where would you put your money first? Where do you think we should focus in terms of cohesion funds that will give us the biggest return on our investment quickly? Yeah, it's good if your microphone's on though. There we go. Perfect.
I'll go the difficult way. I will go into these innovation investments, which are risky, long-term, intangible. You cannot do it by yourself as public sector. You need to partner with the private sector, with the university, with the scientists, with the technologists. I think this is the way forward. I think an innovation, as I said, in a very broad sense. This is not the, you know, I think the previous speaker was saying, okay, there is the money, but what about the effectiveness, efficacy of its use? This is the fundamental question. Do we have plans that are simply an addition of anecdotal, clever or not projects, or are they strategies? And what is the difference between a pile of projects and a strategy? A strategy is something that you have to discuss in terms of where do we stand, what do we count on, and where do we want to go together, and what is realistic for us to reach with what we got, what we are, where we come from. That's a strategy. This is very difficult, and it's not easy, and it requires test and error, and it requires a degree of risk that the public sector is not accustomed to take, and it requires deep pockets and political commitment, because the transformation we are talking about will go beyond one political cycle. So you need a fundamental consensus. Now it has to be sustained, that we are in this together, and we need to look big and far. I don't know if I made, I responded to you.
You did, and I just wanted to build on that a little bit as well, because one of the criticisms is often made is that we have the imbalance, and President Juncker alluded to this as he was leaving office as well. We have to do better at balancing East and West and North and South. And it seems to me that innovation and dynamics that you've just laid out there, the integration of public and private, the universities and the colleges across Europe, all those dynamics have a pan-European dimension to them, which you don't usually find in too many other sectors with all these dynamics embedded in them. Do you see it that way?
Absolutely. And as we speak, to tell you the truth, and this is just by chance, I come from a meeting with our commissioner, Commissioner Gabriel, which is precisely thinking about joining forces with the commissioner you're going to have in a few minutes, in order to establish a pan-European innovation strategy, how to facilitate this transformation through innovation investments. And, infrastructures, physical infrastructures, that is all fine. But if we have learned something from the history of development economics, is that this is a necessary condition, but not sufficient. You need the software and the hardware. And the software is essentially entrepreneurship and innovation and skills and education.
Okay. So you talked about finding our place in the global system as well. Do you see the role of innovation there? Do you see us able to scale up? We have the European Innovation Council, which is really trying to find global competitors from Europe and to hothouse them as well. And then you have the EIT, European Innovation Technology Agency as well, multi-billion euro agency, which most people have never heard of, but it feeds the SMEs and feeds the startups, which should then be hothoused by the EIC. Is this the way that we find a balance within Europe that supports our future economy and supports our future global position?
Sure, this is part of the answer, and we will have to see what will be the results of some of these innovations in our policy instruments. But these come from, let's say, learnings from past mistakes, and I think these are steps in the right direction. But what I also would like to emphasize, and I fully agree with Michael, is that this transformation is basically a multi-stakeholder exercise, a multi-level exercise. This makes it very complex to organize. So the governance is very important. And when speaking about innovation in particular, of course, since a number of years, there is the realization that indeed you need to work together, private and public. I was myself in my previous life in the think tank of the European Commission involved in the launch of the European Battery Alliance, which is a great example of a nice approach where we were able as Europeans to bring together all the stakeholders from throughout the value chain and discuss with them, guys, what are our weak points? What are our strong points? What should we do? And how can we do it together? And this is now being replicated in other domains because there are other very much strategic sectors that we need to look into. And this is important because it's about our future jobs. It's about, therefore, also about safeguarding our social model in the future. And therefore, I strongly believe that it's not, this transformation, the green and digital transformation, is not only something that we need to save the planet or to address global warming, which in itself is a crucial thing, because the consequences will be very big and existential. But it's also just a matter of being smart and sure that we can give a good life to our citizens in the future. So yeah, I think I leave it here.
Thank you. Yeah, people sending questions in, and we're going to come to those shortly. Please use the Q&A and not the chat for those, so the team will copy them over in just a moment as well. Conrad, let's stay on the innovation for a second, then I want to move on to the other demographics and gender in a second. But Conrad, if you look at 5G infrastructure, and how the next generation economy is going to function embedded within it, 5G. That's going to happen in cities. The first rollout of that in any serious way has to happen in an urban environment. Do you think the tables are about to turn?
Well, I hope so. I really hope so, that the incoming technologies will change the way we live in cities for better. And there is the potential. But, Brian, I often call and I often ask people, do not forget about the basics. Do not forget about the basics, such as, I mean, we can imagine how the 5G will transform our cities from now on. But we should also think about the low-hanging fruit. Like, for example, what we observe now, what we can witness now, which is a good thing. Biggest cities are transforming very quickly into a almost no car, or low emission cars at least, zones. It happens very quickly. It happens in Brussels, it happens in Paris, it happens in Berlin, Stockholm, you name the city. But in some cities, you need to give a additional push for the cities to be able to move the transformation, to get from one stage to another, because changing infrastructure is very, very costly. And here is the role for the European Commission. I'm strongly encouraging in all ways I can, as a modest citizen of the European Union, I strongly encourage the European Commission to push the national governments to make sure that national plans for the use of EU Next Gen funds, to use the cohesion policy measures, to make sure that in national plans there is room for the basics, such as transformation of the public transportation systems. This is the public transformation system also can be linked to the 5G and all the modern technologies. But when we think about the public transportation, basics are most important. Basics are where the money is needed for the quick transformation. So I can discuss with you the role of 5G and what can be changed thanks to 5G and other IT technologies. But I will pledge and I will urge all the participants not to draw your attention away from the basics such as public transportation or the housing. It's where we need the intervention.
Okay, Michael, the housing dimension here in terms of families in particular is critical to how our society is educated and how the fabric of that society develops. And you highlight different dimensions, youth in particular, the women who suffer disproportionately for different reasons, not just because they're in the service sector and temporary jobs, responsible for caring, and also they have a huge pension gap at the end of their careers as well, because we still haven't got that right. You know, when it comes to using cohesion funds to solve these problems, where should we be navigating towards? You know, is this a matter of the housing crisis, solve the housing crisis first? And do we need the urban transport sorted out to make that work as well? I know my own country in Ireland, the housing crisis is desperate and getting worse. And that's pretty much the case across Europe. So how do we invest, and I want to keep this in a positive framework, how do we invest and keep going with the bamboo to make sure that we solve these problems in a reasonable time frame?
Okay. One reflection and maybe two, not solutions, but something close to that. Well, the reflection is this is a wicked problem. It's multifaceted, it's fluid, it changes over time. It's seen by very different dimensions. And when you face such problem from the scientific point of view, you need to be multidisciplinary in the approach. And you have to be experimental also in the approach. This is why I value so much the initiative by our president, the Bauhaus. What is the Bauhaus about? It's about consulting with the citizens about, you know, aesthetics and technologies, form follows function, but it's about sustainability and inclusiveness. So this kind of participatory approach where you can dream the future in order to realize it in a realistic way, this is fantastic. The second thing I have to say very clearly, if someone has any experience in terms of renovation wave, is the structural funds. And the renovation wave ticks all the boxes. It diminishes CO2 in the atmosphere. 35%, I think it is, coming from buildings. It diminishes energy consumption. It increases the quality of life, and it hits precisely this problem you're raising, Brian, which is, you know, young people, young for a while. We're all young. This is a moving target also, to find a decent house, to become a citizen. And then, most importantly, it's often ignored, it catalyzes the construction sector at a higher level of skills and technology if you do it properly. And this has been tested in the fund. So let's learn from that.
Great, thank you. We're just going to adjust the timing a little bit on what we're doing. So we're going to run a little bit longer on this and then have the break 10 minutes later, but you're still going to get your 10 minutes break as well. Okay, so I think we have a lot to talk about here. We have a lot of questions coming in as well. I'm going to come to questions in just a second. We talked about populism and the dynamics that feed populism as well. And if we don't get this balance, this harmonization across Europe, right? If we don't use cohesion funds to address the structural causes of populism as well, we have in jeopardy the whole of the European Union project. Saeed, how should we take a political decision rather than an economic decision to solve some of these problems, or do we let the future economy dictate which direction we should go?
Well, my answer would be, of course, that we need to know where to get to. I think it's important to create a vision for a better future, develop a narrative that is convincing, that can, make people confident again about their future, and then, of course, develop policies that help us to get there. And
let me put this in a very concrete way.
Yeah.
Is there any more coherent narrative than healthcare today? Is there anything which could be better understood by the European citizen and European Union than a health union? Is there anything which will strike each individual and the community than this policy?
Yeah, of course, this is very concrete, and especially in COVID times, this is what people think about and care about. And it became obvious that there is a European dimension in all of this. We have discussed some of this, but the health dimension is crucial. But for me, it's very much connected. You will not be surprised, as a special advisor on the Green Deal, that to let's say this more long-term commitment to create a kind of climate-compatible economy. And I think also some examples have been given already. This does not necessarily have to cost to people. Actually, it can be to the benefit of people. And that's the way we need to think and translate our policies, so that basically, indeed, when it comes to the local context in which people live, their cities, their public transformation, as was emphasized by Konrad, their housing policies, all of these have connections with this transformation. And of course,
on this transformation, though, it's an uneven transformation as well.
Exactly, and that's why you need to make it. You need to address the disparities and make it a just transformation, a just transition, as we say. And this require, of course, public policies that are targeted to solving this dimension. Okay. But also, and as the last point I want to say, on top of all the public money available, we will also need to reorient private capital flows. That is what sustainable finance is about. So that all the money out there that is spent via our pension funds and by other institutional investors are used really to the benefit of our communities and to the long-term transformation of our economy, make it compatible with our longer-term societal objectives, basically. Okay. And I think it's happening because, we don't have the time to go too much into detail, but climate risks are today not internalized. They are not paid by those who actually pollute most, which are most often rich people or polluting companies. And this type of issues will have to be high on the agenda to really have the resources to invest in all of this.
All right, I'm going to go to some questions here. Paul Rubick, great to see you, Paul. Former member. He has a number of different comments here. I'm going to try and tie some of these together, and each you can just give a response. Tell me which ones you want to answer. So Paul's talking, say, if Corona's gone, the blackout, the electricity, communications, cyber, hybrid cyber warfare will come next, but are we prepared? Yeah, and we were talking, I think that Michael said earlier about Professor Golden, I think it was. Yeah. So I used to work as a healthcare journalist as well. And every year we would do the World Health Organization says, pandemic's coming, nobody's ready. And it was basically a copy paste every year as well. And it came and nobody was ready. If it comes to resilience, as you spoke about earlier, and what Paul's saying here about electricity, protecting water supply, are we ready for this? And would this kind of thing make or break Europe? And could the cohesion funds help build a stability going forward, which we can, again, bounce forward with? Conrad?
Well, a difficult question, because this is the question we should address to our governments. I mean, for now, I do not know. I mean, I do believe there are some contingency plans hidden well in safe coffers within the reach of ministers and army officers as well. And these are top secret, and they should be. So I really hope our governments, I really hope my Polish government is prepared for any such scenario, because it is a scenario that can happen any minute now. Because we've witnessed already cases of terrorists, state-sponsored terrorists attacking the critical infrastructure. The case of American pipeline from a few weeks ago. I mean, this is an alarm bell for us. We really should think about such a case within our territory. But this is not something the European Union can, in the current framework, this is not something the European Union can do much about, because it has no competences over the safety of critical infrastructure. You've mentioned the health union. I so very much love the idea of health union, but this is again the question to governments. Will the governments take the political, bold, courageous decision to allow European Union to invest into the area, to take more competences in the area? Because right now, I mean, this is kind of a miracle that governments allowed the European Commission to handle the negotiations with the pharmaceutical companies to distribute the vaccines. That was a good thing. There were some problems. We all know about them. The press discussed those problems, but we are on the right track. And this is the path we should follow. But this is, again, I will repeat myself. I'm sorry for that. This is the question for governments and their political decision. It's up to them.
Okay. We'll come back to this in just a second if you want. Michael, I want a question for Said from Eva Lichtenberger. She says, in transport policies, I still see a lot of counter tendencies in Europe. I see the blocking of sustainable road pricing. What to do about that? Said?
Yeah, thanks for this question, Eva. We have worked together so many years ago. Yeah, I mean, this is a typical example, and it was mentioned before. There are so many things that are still in the hands of governments, and we need a discussion in the context of the Conference of Europe about what needs to be done at EU level given the challenges that we are facing. The critical infrastructure, which was mentioned by Paul, was an example. This is another example. Of course, this is more closely connected, let's say, to EU policy making in the context of the Green Deal. I think that one of the issues that will come up soon in the context of the Fit for 55 package, which is a translation of the climate law, is exactly how to deal with transport. Should it be included in the emission trading system or not? Or should we combine it with road charging measures and so on and so on? But we were not able in the past to really make a lot of progress, not sufficient progress, because of the resistance of so many in our member states. But I think there is increasing realization that now it's serious and we need to move on and really do something about it, and make sure that costs, external costs such as environmental costs, carbon, etc., need to be internalized and paid by those who pollute. And by this, you can invest in technologies and you can create alternatives for people, because of course transport is important and needs to be accessible.
All right, thank you. I'm going to take one more question, then we're going to go for a break, and we'll try and come back to those questions. Everybody's woken up and they're feverishly typing in questions now. Michael, you want to take this one? Jean-Pierre Audi, he's speaking, I'm not going to read it all, but basically he's talking about Europe's debt rating, and it was downgraded in 2013, and now we're taking on a huge amount more debt, and you know, Western states could be downgraded by 2040, he says, due to declining demographics. I would say, does that matter anymore in terms of our reform packages? Are we sufficiently robust as a union, as a single currency, to weather the temperamental values of Standard & Poor and others?
Brian, this is a very difficult question, but I saw yesterday a tweet that was quite striking. It was about the latest Eurobarometer results in terms of backing of the euro. You would be maybe surprised, as I was, to see how high this is. Highest, I think, higher than any other time in the last 10, 15 years, including in non-usual suspects that you might find in Greece, almost 3 out of 4 people, if I remember correctly, even supporting or something close to that. So this is part of the answer. The second one is that debt is a moving target. It all depends on how fast and how big we grow, because debt has to be seen with respect to that other variable. So we need to find a way for competitive sustainability, which is well grounded, solid, that allow us to pay our debt in the medium and long term. And I'm convinced we can do that.
Excellent summary. All right, thank you for that. Look.